Welcome to Module 1, They Died Horrible Deaths. You will find throughout this course that these modules, these 10 modules, are the organizing principles on which the course is organized. And you will see how we follow these lessons from the modules through the other days and items that we'll study. Death is, as I suggest here on this slide, a natural and inevitable process. Yet when it comes suddenly, especially to someone known to us all, as it did to John Kennedy, the president, on November 22nd, 1963, it startles us, it shocks the system, it outrages the country. I lived through this. I was a high school junior at the time, and I can tell you that America came to its knees literally, and we prayed for the salvation of his soul and for the consolation that the United States might get in our sorrow for the president. We've had many such assassinations and deaths throughout our 20th century. Some of these deaths that occurred were the result of neglect, governmental neglect, personal neglect, inattention. We have three illustrated here. In the upper left-hand corner of the slide, you see a cartoon that offers a macabre image of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, that terrible industrial accident or event that killed 100 and more immigrant women who were working there making shirtwaists, making women's blouses in the middle of town. Right in the middle, of course, is a fireman holding a baby on April 20th, 1995 in Oklahoma City, where 158 people died as a result of the terrible attack perpetrated by Timothy McVeigh and his collaborators. And then, of course, at the bottom on the center, we have the famous USS Arizona Memorial in the middle of Pearl Harbor out in Honolulu. The memorial itself sits astride the sunken battleship Arizona. What power, if any, do we have as a society over death? This is one you've probably not heard about. It's the Eastland disaster. On July 24th, 1915, 844 people died when an excursion boat capsized in the Chicago River, not even on Lake Michigan, but in the river. This was a group of Western Electric employees and their families that were scheduled to take the short ride across Lake Michigan over to Michigan, where 8,000 or 10,000 of them were to enjoy a company-wide picnic. This disaster certainly put an end to the lives, in some cases, of entire families. What did we learn from this tragedy? What did we learn early in the 20th century, and what have we learned now, more than 100 years later? You will be doing research and creating a report on the Eastland, so you will have a better answer for that very soon. This is a photo I took of the plaque that commemorates the location where the Eastland went down, right there in the Chicago River. This, frankly, was a disaster that was unknown to most people in Illinois until the students of the Illinois Math and Science Academy, a gifted magnet school in Aurora, Illinois, found out about it and decided they would make this their cause. You can go to the Chicago History Museum and also see a terrific exhibit now. In 1900, when this terrible hurricane came and savaged Galveston, Texas, there was no radio, there was no effective National Weather Service, there was no way to let people know the size and scale of this terrible hurricane. And 6,000 people died. As you read about this on the internet, you will find that there were some Sisters of Charity who ran an orphanage there in Galveston. And as the storm built up, so many people thought they could live through the storm as they had with previous storms. The sisters, out of an abundance of caution, took these children. They moved upstairs to the second floor and then the third floor in the orphanage. And finally the waves overcame them and many were swept out to sea. The sisters would tie children with their cinctures. It's like rope-like belt that nuns used to wear in their habits. Or they would just hold the children in their arms. Hours and days later, they found some of these nuns still gripping, literally with a death grip, these children. So many of these people, including the children and the nuns, were buried right there on the beach where they were found because there was nothing else to do. These kind of natural disasters still happen in the form of earthquakes and storms, but we have a little bit more power over them now, predictive power at least. It is odd that in late June of 2020, I should be retelling the story about the Spanish flu. That in the course of 7 months killed more than 675,000 Americans. Now, it's called the Spanish flu, but that is absolutely a misnomer because it really developed at Fort Riley, out here just west of us in Kansas. And when the American cavalry and artillery were sent over to Europe, they took the disease and they took their mules. Apparently, this virus cooked up in a mule dung pile, mule manure, and it spread throughout the world. And it was a terrible export. I guess history's judgment has been kind because they did not call it the Kansas flu, but it killed all the same. Ryan White was a delightful and completely innocent young boy who was diagnosed with hemophilia when just 6 days old. Hemophilia is a disease where your blood will not clot. And if the blood doesn't clot, then even a simple cut could cause such a child to bleed to death. Well, Ryan depended on blood transfusions anytime he had an episode. He got a blood transfusion, and unfortunately that 1984 transfusion was given to him with blood tainted with HIV/AIDS. And in those days they didn't know enough to test for the virus, and so he became the face of AIDS. Now, I will tell you that in the early 1980s, when AIDS first came out, it was a disease associated with intravenous drug users and homosexuals who transmitted it through sex. And it was a disease at the outset that had very little sympathy and very little attention of the American public. It wasn't until Ryan White, dying as he was with AIDS, unstoppable and untreatable, he testified before the U.S. Congress, and they passed a law that required blood to be tested for AIDS before it be put in the blood bank. Ryan White, this innocent who died among 5,100 children in America who died, was the face of this disease, and a face that humanized the disease and gave people more sympathy for those who suffered from the disease. This clipping from the Ludington Daily News, April 12, 1990, tells the story of his funeral, and it tells First Lady Barbara Bush and all these other celebrities who came to be in consolation and some comfort to the family of Ryan White. Here's another child who died in circumstances not deserved. George Steiny Jr. was executed in North Carolina on June 16, 1944. This young boy was charged with killing 2 little white girls, was charged with beating them to death with a railroad spike. How could one little boy grab 2 girls and simultaneously beat them to death, or sequentially beat them to death? He did not do this crime. In fact, he was exonerated many, many years later in 2014. The jury, as it says here, took only 10 minutes, an all-white jury. His white attorney put on no defense, asked no questions in cross-examination. George's family was forced to leave their town because they were just driven out. All he had was the family Bible and the comfort of a pastor who would come and see him. He carried the Bible to the electric chair, And when they found out that they could not put the little cap on top of his head because he was too short, they made him sit on the family Bible so he could be effectively electrocuted and executed. The youngest person, age 14, ever to be executed in America. He died a horrible death. These are four men, we've already spoken about John Kennedy, who died at the hands of assassins. They each had grand missions in America. Malcolm X in the upper left-hand corner, Bobby Kennedy, June of 1968, John Kennedy, November 63, and Martin Luther King, April of 1968. These men and their legacy has lived on. There are still people who live out the visions and who look to enact the visions of the unfinished agenda that these men brought us. They did die horrible deaths. Emmett Till. We could do a whole class on Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a bright young boy from Chicago whose mother said to him, "Now, Emmett, you're going down to visit your cousin and your uncle in Mississippi. Remember, Mississippi is not like Chicago. You must be careful." Well, he wasn't careful enough, I guess. And there's a wonderful, wonderful documentary that I watched on television not long ago. And it told the story about Emmett and his cousins and interviewed some of the cousins. And he was taken by two white men, Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam, and they were going to take him out and beat him or whatever they were going to do. And he just got sassy. They shot him. They hung a 70-pound cotton gin fan around his neck and threw him in the river. The police finally found the body. And when they found the body, it was terribly disfigured, as you can see from the pictures here. And they called Mamie Bradley, Emmett's mother, and she said, "Send him up the way he looks. That's the way we'll look at him." And in fact, she displayed his lifeless body at the A.A. Rayner Funeral Home there on the south side of Chicago. Emmett Till, his horrible death, dramatized and really for a lot of people began in earnest the civil rights struggle in America in the modern era. Emmett Till died a horrible death.